All right, I will call the Capital Improvement and Planning Committee meeting to order for Monday, July 10th. It is 7:34 p.m. First item on the agenda is reorganization of the committee. We have officially entered a new fiscal year, and even though everyone is on a multi-year appointment, I think it's good governance to always have a reorganization if the committee so desires, if they want to change any roles. Just forever as a reminder, obviously I currently serve as chair. Joe is serving as vice chair, and Jeff continues to serve as clerk. So the question is, does anyone want to change it up or keep it status quo? If we want to keep it status quo, we need a motion to that effect. If we want to change it up, then I'd want to hear nominations or motions to change either or any of those roles. So open up to the committee.
I'm personally fine keeping the role I have, so I'm willing to keep that as is.
Tony, Joe, Steve, any comments, thoughts?
Are you guys willing to continue in your current roles?
I am.
Yes, unless anyone else wants it.
And I would move that we continue with the same slate of leaders.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, we'll do a roll call vote. Shoner,
Aye.
Park,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Holland,
Aye.
and I will abstain. So it's a 401 vote. Next is approval of meeting minutes from April 24th, 2023. Jeff, I believe you already provided Joe some typographical
Correct.
type edits. Are there any other edits to the original draft that Joe submitted? Seeing none, I will move to approve the minutes with those grammatical edits. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, roll call vote. Shoner,
Aye.
Park,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Holland,
Aye.
and Malinowski is aye. Chair member updates. The Nearing Building Committee is in full swing at this point. They expect to award a contract for an OPM this week, pending contract negotiations, and then it will go to the MSBA for ratification. And then they'll move on to hiring a designer, and then the real work will actually begin of what in the world are we actually doing. Any questions on that? That committee still does have two new resident openings. The school committee actually gave up one of their seats. So if anyone knows someone that's really interested in the project, there are two at-large resident openings out there. Next is Community Center Exploration Committee. That committee is on pause, waiting for their consultant to get going. So the same consultant that did our space needs, DRA, last summer, is continuing their contract, but taking a deeper dive looking at Finn and the art of the possible there for the same constituent groups that we talked about last year. That project is going to kick off imminently and be completed this fall, so that the town, could hear the potential options and really chart a path forward for all of our municipal needs. So obviously, I think capital is going to have a huge say in that, in terms of the direction and trying to rationalize needs versus wants, and making sure that we're setting the highest priorities and making recommendations that may or may not be popular depending upon the path that is chosen by each of the constituent groups. So that one is actually required, at least by the current charge, to have an update to the select board by the end of the calendar year, so December of 2023. Any questions or comments there? All right. Next item on the agenda is the fire department request regarding grant matching funds. So in next year's capital plan, the fire department has a sizable capital expense for SCBAs, which are, in short, the air tanks they wear on their back into hazardous conditions. They've jointly partnered with two other communities on an assistance to firefighters grant. with that grant, while there's no guarantee of an award, comes a match from the town. The match is obviously a fraction of what it would cost us to do it on our own. The chief has submitted a request jointly to capital and advisory to authorize adding the grant match to the capital plan, which would be our task, and then to advisory for potential funding in the event that they're awarded the grant before a town meeting. Advisory has met on the topic, thinks it's a good idea, but has not quote unquote backstopped anything or funded anything from the reserve fund yet, because it's really an FY24 expenditure, which we're now 10 days into that year. So that they do plan to meet and at least take a position on whether to backstop it or not. But I think the intent would be to try to get this allocated out of the ambulance fund longer term at a fall town meeting if one were to happen, or even the spring town meeting if that's not too late to do some certain allocations. So our job tonight is solely to support or not support whether to add this $35,000 request, which is not to exceed, to the capital plan for a potential match for the SCBA per the chief's request. So any questions or comments on what we're voting on? Okay, then I'll move that we support Chief Achilles' request to add an amount of $35,000 to the FY24 capital plan for funding of any potential match for an assistance to firefighters grant for self-contained breathing apparatus. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further conversation? All right, roll call vote. Hark,
Aye.
Shoner,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Holland,
Aye.
and Malinowski's aye. So that's unanimous. The next is the FY25 capital request vetting process. So as everyone knows, the town, at least recently, has had a history of having a fall town meeting. The select board are meeting tomorrow night, and I think we'll make a final determination of whether that's happening or not. Mark can correct me on the word final. But one of the things they've done is solicited from boards and committees, and I think you all probably saw the email, as well as department heads, what would be on a potential warrant so they could decide whether to convene or not. There are capital items. I've gotten emails at least from DPW and fire at this point with items that they at least would like to see considered at the fall. So we will take those up in short order, assuming that the select board is going to actually post a warrant for a special. But longer term, just especially Steve, because this is going to be your first time through the cycle. At this time of the year, we typically ask the departments to refresh their capital plan. We give them usually 45 calendar days to do that. We show them what we have currently. We ask them to kind of dust things off, pull together documentation. So my plan was to initiate that process with a due date shortly thereafter Labor Day, with the intent that capital would meet in September and October to vet and prioritize the request for the spring town meeting. But that basically means we would follow the same process, at least this majority of this group has followed for the last couple of years. So I just wanted to make sure that that was the direction everyone wanted to follow, and whether there are any tweaks that you wanted to make to the process.
No, thought it worked well last year. There wasn't really a lot of last minute things that we could control, right? So I think it worked well.
Any other commentary? I assume no one wants to meet earlier than Labor Day to start discussing items for a spring town meeting. All right, fair enough. Then I will get that in motion, and Brian and Mark will probably need some help, especially with DPW, given I know we have a new superintendent coming on there, and he's going to obviously have his hands full with, getting up to speed. And unfortunately, I think that's where a lot of the capital currently sits for next year, at least based on where we left off last year. Okay, so moving on. In your packet, you have, so we're going on to item 7, new and existing sidewalks, review a proposal and vote on a recommendation in the select board. So at our last meeting, we talked a lot about where we're at, what we could do. And Beta had just finalized a plan, at least evaluation of the condition of our roads. So we thought at least with their existing sidewalks, we could go back and get a, add on to that scope to evaluate the condition of our existing sidewalks. But they were able to take their proposal one step further and basically take it into a process that would not only evaluate existing sidewalks conditions, it would look at potential new sidewalks, like where and how much it could take to add sidewalk to certain areas, but also with a specific lens to ADA compliance and making sure that the compliance was there for any infrastructure upgrades that we do make to existing, but also as we start to think forward to new items. When the proposal came in, it was sent to me from a capital perspective because I participated in the initial process into Select Board Member Stivers. Our initial reaction was, like the idea, would love to see a different cost. And we were able to, thanks to Mark and Abdul, the interim DPW superintendent's work, get the proposal you have in front of you down to 50,000 even, as opposed to what you see in the original submission. So really, what's in front of capital tonight is the intent would be to ask the select board to take some of the 700K that they allocated us for sidewalks and to actually award this contract using ARPA funding to allow us to actually develop the comprehensive plan that we were charged with, and to have what I'll call some real true backing to it from people that work in this area every day. So that's really what's in front of us, and the eventual motion would be whether or not we support sending this proposal to the select board for award with the intent of using 50,000 out of the 700,000 of ARPA funding to develop the plan. So I'll open up to questions and discussion.
Were there other bids solicited?
Mark, do you want to talk about how that works?
Or was the existing, was there a previous project?
So Mark is our chief procurement officer for the town, so he can talk to how that worked.
So there was a previous solicitation where we looked at pavement management system companies that do that kind of work. Beta Group was the successful company for that, and we moved forward and contracted with them for this work. When the discussion of adding a sidewalk overlay to this product came up, there is in terms of procurement law, there is an exemption which allows you for engineering services and things that that this fits squarely into that box. You don't have to go out to bid for it. The state gives you broad discretion in it. We had thought about maybe putting something out, getting some quotes, getting some interest. Beta provided this proposal to do this, and there was an interest in doing it given that they had just done the pavement management work, and having the same person work on the same product basically, and providing just an overlay to the work that was already done. So it wasn't something we had to bid for. It was a very attractive approach as to how that the Beta wanted to do it. And we felt that if the price was right, we would move forward. And again, I know Jason had given me a little bit of credit, but our interim DPW superintendent has worked with Beta Group in the past and was able to negotiate the price down from 60 down to 50 without reducing the scope of services. So I think, and it's also going to help us out with our SPAC committee, formerly our ADA committee for accessibility. They're going to take a look at, I think, over 300 ramps, up to 300 ramps for our sidewalks to make sure that everything is in compliance and meeting all the accessibility requirements.
Yeah, I agree with the approach to it too. That's great. Thank you.
Go ahead, Jeff. Then Tony.
I'm gonna piggyback off one question based on Mark's comment. Is there a new version of this? You said 50 down from 60. The version we have says about 60. Was anything reduced in scope? Or is
No.
there a new
So
version
I
of this?
yeah, so Jason, I thought I provided you the most recent scope, which was the one that was at 50.
You may have, but I
Okay.
did not see it if you
So,
did.
so Jeff, to answer your question, I believe, and Jason could keep me honest, the original contract for 60 said that we're going to review all your sidewalks and all your ramps, and you know, and we're going to look at everything you've got. I think in conversations with Sam Stivers, he had estimated that, you know, we've got about 30 miles of sidewalks in town. With the potential for 30 miles of sidewalks and ramps. And so when the interim superintendent negotiated the price down from 60 to 50, they held us to the estimates that they thought that we were going to, you know, we're looking at up to 300 ramps and up to 30 miles of sidewalks. Now, Abdul took a look through at the GIS and a look at the pavement management, and he said, even though they've actually now put limits in, those limits are what we set. And they don't think there's going to be, you know, doesn't think there's going to be any issue that we'll have to pay any overage for any additional distance of sidewalks or anything. So really, we saved $10,000 and didn't reduce the scope at all.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm just seeing conflicting things here about 50 versus 30 miles of sidewalks. I want to make sure this is all covered.
It is.
Okay. And then point two, did we give them a set of scope for phases, or is this what they typically would come back with on phase 1, 2, 3, and 4? Given that we didn't go out to bid on this, I'm just curious if that's.
Yeah, we, like I said, we were willing to put this out to bid, but Beta Group came back with something very favorable as to how we wanted to look at this. You know, given that we're already contracting with them for the pavement management services. And, you know, in all honesty, if we really didn't like what we saw, I think we were very willing to put out an RFQ, you know, and go in another direction. But, you know, I think we're because of the pavement management, we're probably going to be establishing a long-term relationship here, because there is going to be some management expenses, you know, for them updating the system and making sure that it does what we expect it to do. And putting in this side, having them do the sidewalk overlay, they're doing the road work. They can give us, I think, a more holistic view of all of our sidewalk and road infrastructure at the same time.
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
Does
Tony, I
anybody
saw
remember
you
how
go
much-
to say, hang on, Joe. I saw Tony go saying something right when Jeff had his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, I've read the document. I find the document to be a little confusing. So it talks about 70 miles of roads. There's a reference to 30 miles of sidewalk, but then they talk about assessing 50 miles of sidewalk. So they're not looking at new sidewalks, they're just assessing existing sidewalks.
Let me try this, Mark, and you chime in.
No,
70
I'm making the
miles
meeting longer than you wanted it to be, so you go.
There's 70 miles of road, 30 miles of existing sidewalk. And what they're saying is they're going to look at an additional 20 miles for potential enhancement to our network.
Okay, so maybe I didn't read this close enough to tease that out, but so they're going to look at a potential 20 more miles. And how do they decide which roads to apply those 20 miles to?
They're going to look at for example, if a road is not ever going to be wide enough, even if you cut down trees, took land, I think they would use some judgment, right? If it's a two houses on a road, right? But it's a long road. They're gonna have to use some judgment. But I think a lot of what at least we saw with the pavement management projects that they rely on data to support their conclusions. And I think they would come back to us too, I would hope, at least, if they said, guess what, we easily can cover the 20 miles, but we think there's an additional 10 miles that you really should be thinking about. I would hope they would come back to us and say, you could expand your scope by this amount to look at that. But I think they're also trying to be realistic that you wouldn't cover the town. And it's not ever going to be financially feasible to cover the town with just a 70 miles of sidewalk. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but
Yeah, I mean, that sort of makes sense. It leaves it gray, at least in my mind, then about what they're actually gonna do.
Well, my understanding when reading it was that they were supposedly going to take into account our master plans and other documents in the town to pick and choose also of the sidewalks that haven't been done, the ones that are listed in there, that those would be in those extra amounts.
So
But whether that
I have
happens or not is
I have no
different.
idea. Do we have a master plan somewhere that says
Yeah.
this is the prioritized streets where there should be sidewalks?
There's
Okay.
a sidewalk plan.
that was that. Tony, I think, were you not at the last meeting? We
I
talked
was
a
not,
little bit
so I
about.
apologize if this
Yeah.
is repeated.
No,
Okay,
these are good questions, because if you're just looking at the proposal in silo, then those, but I think there used to be a sidewalk committee that actually in 2015 made a series of recommendations, but it was more wasn't based on data. It was more based on, okay, you're near a school. How do we take from down Parkerville or Richards or whatever other roads have schools on them, as an example?
okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think just to tag on to that, Tony, I think one of the benefits of the pavement management software is, we have $4 million, let's just pick a number. We have $4 million in the bank to do roads. Where should we best apply it? What roads need the work? What roads help, to improve our overall infrastructure? Same with the sidewalks. You've got so much money in sidewalks. Where should we put it? Should we be using it to repair some of these? Should we be looking to connect sidewalk networks in neighborhoods and do a short stretch, which actually has greater benefit, that type of thing. So I think it's kind of like Moneyball. We're going to use, we're not going to go from the gut, which quite honestly, hasn't served us badly. But I think, our previous DPW superintendent, she knew what needed to be done, and that's the direction we went in. And now we're going to use some data and information to back up, the things that, we do. And I think it'll help provide more credibility, to the committee and to the town as to the choices we make and how we spend the money.
Thank you.
Joe, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, no problem at all. I suppose I have a little questions around what's the self-assessment materials are and how that helps us. I sort of agree with Tony that even though I read it front to back, understanding what some of these and how much we need the ADA component, I don't know. Maybe the ADA committee, if they want to, sort of endorse that would be a great thing to have as well, because I don't know how to gauge that. The other, it's tough to say I want to spend the money doing this. If it's going to provide us with a really firm plan moving forward and an idea of considerations that might allow us to better evaluate the costs of each segment coming forward, because that's going to be really crucial in terms of trying to budget out what money there is. That would be really, really helpful to know. I didn't really divine whether I get the idea that they give you some idea of what you're looking at, but not necessarily. I don't know how comprehensive that is. And I mean, I don't know whether any of their equipment does any ground penetration to understand what the conditions are like that you're going to run into, expanding that road out. So I guess I have some questions about, how well we're going to be able to utilize what we do get.
I think the only, I guess, the way I would react is when I think about what we had to go through last year for the roads. We basically were tasked with making decisions based on feedback from residents, which is incredibly important, in the recommendations of a DPW superintendent who was clearly competent in the area in steering us in the right direction, but she didn't have access to what was underlying or whether it was the best use of funding, because we were looking at 10 or 12 roads in isolation, as opposed to however many roads this town has. So this is, I think, at least why I'm supportive of it, is it's going to give us data to make educated decisions of, you have a road that you can add a sidewalk that for $10,000, let's hope it's that cheap, right? It's never going to be, right? And it's one of the high priority ones. Like that's an easy one to slot near the top of your list. You have another road that's at the bottom of the list from a prioritization perspective because of use, because of how many people would benefit from it, and or the conditions you need to extract. And oh yeah, by the way, it's going to cost you $1 million to do it. I think you would have at least that data set to guide you in the right direction from a feasibility perspective to then get you into some harder numbers and budgeting of taking it to the next phase. But if you just start with the whole infrastructure of 70 miles in the town, I don't know where to start. It's not my background. And I think we'd be back to the old methodology, which I don't think is what the town is asking from us at this point.
No, and well, I mean, we fight to get every sidewalk dollar, it seems like every single year, which is I think why it's so hard to like say, all right, we'll put 50,000 into this, because it's like you can almost walk around the town and, pick, you can just look at one sidewalk and be like, okay, that's where the money's going, because we know it's not going to go farther. So it's just, yeah, I mean, I totally get it. I'm with you on one hand, and on the other hand, I'm like going, ah, crap, like more money into something else, not the actual hardware.
So let me throw a lifeline out there, but I have a question first. Brian, do you know if I don't believe the governor has finalized the 24 budget yet, correct? No. Okay. So Senator Eldridge, had approved, had gotten an earmark for about $75,000 for the town for, as it said, and I'm just reading it here, to promote environmental initiatives and increase accessibility for people with disabilities, right? As broad as you can get. There's no delineation, anything. It was one of 478 amendments that was approved by the Senate for the budget. Again, it's got to go through the House. It's got to go through conference committee, and the governor's got to approve it. These likely die on the vine. Sometimes they do happen. But if something like that were to happen, I think that the board, may be willing to take some of the money, or at least to entertain taking some of that funding and using it to offset what you would be willing to recommend to use with ARPA tonight, which would then reallocate the ARPA back into actual sidewalk construction use, which is really what we're looking for here. So I'm trying to give you some hope.
But I think our motion should be using ARPA funding, and then depending on where that lands, when you discuss it with the select board, you can raise the point you just made. But I don't want everyone to vote on that using that hope. We need to vote on it, assuming it's coming out of the 700 ARPA.
Yeah.
And then if that gets defeated, then that would be our only hope, I guess.
I mean, absent any other funding options is probably your best
Okay.
bet.
Okay. Is there any more discussion people want to have on this? All right, then I'm going to move that the CIPC support the beta proposal for 50K with an intended funding source of the 700K of allotted sidewalk money coming from ARPA. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, roll call vote. Hark.
Aye.
Shoner.
Aye.
Palmer.
I'm gonna abstain. I just don't.
Okay, Holland.
Aye.
And I'm aye as well, so that will be a 401 vote. Next is capital project status and procedures moving forward. More of just an FYI that once Carla, Brian, and team get through the finance busy season, I am going to request that we actually get a listing and the documentation submitted by department heads to carry over capital funds from year to year and take a formal position on each of them to make sure that they are still in line with the capital policy. So I did not want to bother them while they try to close the books, before the 15th, but I do hope that we can have something for our next meeting. Any questions on that? So Brian, I will put that in writing, but I didn't feel like causing any unnecessary anxiety until you get through whatever reserve fund transfers or department transfers you have.
Yeah, Brian's not the one you have to worry about.
All right, we have no public here, so I'm going to bypass public comment and see if there's any other business that anyone wants to conduct tonight. All right, then I will make a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, roll call vote. Hark,
Aye.
Shoner,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Holland,
Hi.
and Malinowski's aye. I'll be in touch on our next meeting date once I hear from, I guess, the select board on whether we're having a fall town meeting.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason.
Aye.